Today we have with us Jennifer, who is the STEM programs manager at the SciPort Center in Shreveport, Louisiana. Welcome to the Be a Maker podcast. Just let's start with what you do.
All right, hi, it's nice to be here. I'm Jennifer Johnson, and I work at SciPort Discovery Center in Shreveport, Louisiana, which is a small to mid-sized science center that serves a tri-state region. So we're like in the northwest corner of Louisiana, and we get a lot of visitors from East Texas and from Arkansas right above us, and then I know Louisiana is a very tiny state, really, when people see it on a map, but we get a lot of people from the bottom of the state coming all the way up here, too. So um, we get people from Mississippi, and we do have visitors that come from all around the world because we have an Air Force base that's nearby. So it is the only science center within a 3-hour radius. And so we serve a lot of students at schools in multiple parishes from different states, from K-12. And we also partner with local universities and colleges here to give college students opportunities. Sometimes it's to showcase something they're working on, or it may be to have volunteer hours to be able to satisfy a class, or maybe they just really like science and want to do something with kids. And so sometimes we have a lot of college students that'll work in the summer to help us because we get a lot busier then. And let's see, for me personally, I get to do a lot of fun things here because not only do I get to do all of the education and interact with education with my colleagues and people that are here, I also get to help out with on the exhibits committee. So I personally love ideating and making, and so helping come up with ideas for exhibits that withstand hundreds of thousands of visitors doing interactive things has been a really cool challenge. I didn't realize how many hands touch things and how sturdy things have to be. It's
Wow,
even more so than a kindergarten classroom. So
wow, that's saying something actually. So wait, are you actually involved in the sort of ideation and the conceptualization of the exhibits, and then you have to build them out, right? So do you oversee all of that as well?
I don't oversee that part, but I'm on the committee. So any of us in the center that want to be on the committee, we have an exhibits team,
Mhm.
operations and exhibits that actually does most of the manufacturing. But any of us that want to be on the committee to help ideate and, like even if it's just to iterate something that already exists, maybe there's one little piece that is constantly getting broken. And
Oh, yeah.
sometimes somebody that works the floor compared to somebody who's doing operations compared to somebody who's an educator may all see that in that solution in different ways. And so we have our approach is to have kind of a group of people to give input. And it is still up to the exhibits and operations team to make that final change or fix and that kind of stuff. But we all like I get to help do prototypes, which I think is really fun. I like doing that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
That's Let me ask you a little bit about like the distinctions between the different, I guess, acronyms and the methods, right? So we have STEM, which
right.
stands for science, technology, engineering, and math. And then we have STEAM, where the A stands for art. And then we have maker education, I guess.
Yep.
In your mind, what is the distinction between these three activities? And I know there is overlap, but how would you how do you see the separation between these three?
So for me, the maker movement and maker activities really are more about the passion that you have to do that thing and giving that space, being given that space to do that thing. On top of that, wanting to share it. So the other two, while you have people that like to do all of that, the community of makers is so collaborative and so willing to share and help each other learn, whether you're 5 or 55 or 105. It's a whole different feeling and a different mindset of wanting to invest the time, and you know you're going to fail at things. You know you're going to have to keep doing it, and you're okay with that. And you want, that's part of the fun of it. So for me, that's really fun. Like I know that I'm going to fail at a lot of the things, but the challenge is I'm going to keep going until I get it where I want it to be.
Right. So are you saying that like the maker education or the maker movement, as you know, as it's called, has more like a philosophical foundation to it? Because the activities, you know, can be engineering, they can be art driven, they can even be just cultural, right? Is that, would I be correct to say that?
Yes, and I think that when I think about the philosophy, I really think it's one where we want students as educators, we want all students to develop resiliency. You can't develop resiliency unless you have the time to truly fail and the time to truly recover. So if you don't have the time for that, and sadly in schools are set up to do things in moments from 20 minutes to 60 minutes or 55 minutes to almost 90 minutes. Those who have the almost 90 minutes feels like, oh my God, they're so lucky. They have all that time. Now, I'm sure some days they don't feel like they want all that time. Some days they're probably like, really, we can't drag this out anymore.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it feels like they're so lucky that they have time.
Mm.
And because you can't do any of these things, well, you can do them, but you can't, in my opinion, the kids or the person doing that activity is not able to internalize, process, revisit the things, ask questions.
Mhm.
That just takes time, and there's not time in our schools often.
Yeah, and that's a really great point. The concept, if you have a STEM class, the concepts are delivered. They get checked in whether the class has understood it or not. But the application is really where I think the maker movement comes into its own because you have people to support you, you have mentors. There are none of those restrictive in the movement. It's all about you being a part of the process, but then you having agency over how your learning takes place. And everybody does enjoy that. You do work with schools, right?
Yes, so my background, I came from K-12 education. I taught Spanish actually for about 15 years, and 3-year-olds, which I did not realize that 3-year-olds could do something for, 45 minutes in another language. But when you do things that are like making, because everything that I've ever done
Uh-huh.
has really been centered around, and I just kind of naturally did this as a teacher. I didn't really realize at first that I was doing anything different. It's just how I did stuff. I would talk to the teacher, see what they're doing, whether they were
Mhm.
3-year-olds, sixth graders, it didn't matter. Then I would do actionable physical things with the kids to apply that concept, but I was doing it in Spanish. So they already knew how to do what we were doing. They
Right,
already knew how to run, jump, and hop.
right.
But they, like, sometimes I would have the little kids, they would
Mhm.
have to say the verbs in Spanish, but they had to be doing the verbs, and they might make up a game. Like two of them get together and make up a game, and they had to use, like 3 action verbs or something.
Right.
They always had amazing games, and they were actually kind of fun to play, you know?
Mhm.
And so really having that chance to apply what they were doing in the classroom, because Spanish was a second language for probably 95% of the kids that I was teaching at that time.
Right.
Um, and even the ones that spoke Spanish at home, they really had fun in the class because they were getting to use the Spanish instead of like, we did we learned grammar in a more natural way like we do with our kids at home. Like you
Mhm.
just correct it and move on. We're not
Right.
having a grammar lesson. And so they got to actually help teach sometimes with the kids, which made it more fun for the kids. I kept a notebook with me all the time because, like, I had a lot of kids at one school. I say a lot, that 10%, but a lot of those kids happened to be from, I'm trying to remember, I think that it was they're from Chile and Argentina, and it had something to do with I was in Atlanta at the time, and the headquarters for Coca-Cola is there, and they have some kind of a program where when you get to a certain level of management, your whole family comes over and stays. I mean, for like over a year. Like I think it's a
Oh,
two-year
like
program or
an
something to
expat
work.
almost.
Yeah, and they work at the headquarters for Coca-Cola. So
Okay.
a lot of times that's when we would have
Mm,
at my school, those were students that we would
mm,
get sometimes. So what I learned Spanish in college, it wasn't like a second language for me or anything.
mm.
So a lot of the vocabulary I learned was I had teachers from Mexico and teachers from Cuba were
Oh,
most of my teachers. So
right.
oftentimes these kids would have a different vocabulary word for something as simple as trash or whatever, right? Like it didn't matter. There was all, and we have the same thing in English. We just don't realize it
Mhm.
because we know so many synonyms. It doesn't even process that someone's using another word most of the time. And so I would keep a notebook so I could learn all of these new words, and I would
Mhm.
always tell the kids, like, you have to teach me more words. I need to know more words. And so the kids that spoke Spanish always had fun getting to teach, like to teach me too, because it's kind of hard to know everything.
Right.
Like you can't know everything in the world. Other people are going to know more than you. It's okay.
That that sort of anecdote gives real good structure to how I think even making feels. The way you're describing how you learned language, there's now research that shows that's the best way to learn language, right? To interact with different native speakers, learn different synonyms, different dialects of the same language. And that's how, even if you don't end up speaking that specific one, what it does is it adds to your overall knowledge of the language. And therefore, even the form of the language that you were originally learning becomes better, which I think
Right.
really applies well to making. That's a very natural way to for us as humans. Making is actually one of the most natural things we've been doing since we found fire. I'm gonna interject with a little bit of my personal story. I grew up in India, middle class. Our goals were either to become a doctor, engineer, or like a CPA. I always try to make it, but that wasn't available. There was no physical space. People in my peer group were not doing it. And one of the things that really fascinated me about the US was we were looking at American soaps or movies, especially when there was like a family scene or like middle class America at that time. It was always working in a car with the kids around and they were making things, they were making furniture sometimes, and I was endlessly fascinated by it. I couldn't wait to come here, you know, whenever I got the opportunity and be part of that. And when I came here, it was kind of disappointing because I realized
I was just
that
going to
nobody's
say,
doing
like,
that anymore. It was
minute.
just, it was so like, it becomes such a use and throw culture. And I was like,
Mhm.
what happened? What happened to all of those things that I saw? And that then feeds into my story of why I ended up setting up a children's makerspace. So, from a personal point of view, identify with what it is like to be a maker. But to go back, I wanted to see how do you deal with this sort of separation in that sense that you're going to schools, right? Where now, especially, there's a real push for STEM education. How do you then bridge that divide? And how do you enable people to go from just STEM conceptual learning to then applying it in making? Do you have any special techniques?
I'll
How
tell
do
you,
you
I
do
was,
that?
I think the biggest thing is having consistent time with that teacher and basically becoming a coach and modeling sometimes and encouraging them to do, and then you jump in when you see that they're uncomfortable and talking to them enough to know where they're uncomfortable. Because I will say, teachers oftentimes, if there's a change, like a teacher might think it's wonderful to do a STEM class.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, you just added the A into STEM. That's more work for me. I don't even have time to do the work that I'm already doing, is how they
Right,
feel.
right.
Until someone can show them that it's not more work, it's different work. You were already doing design, you were doing engineering design. So design thinking is really closely related to engineering design and can apply to everything. from art to a couch to plumbing, whatever. I mean, anything that you're doing. So
Right.
and your kids were already choosing colors.
Mm-hmm.
They had to have chosen them for a reason. Talk about the reason. You just included art.
Gotcha.
And so giving them really tiny things to see that they're already doing, then they know they're doing it. Because
Mm,
oftentimes, it happens to all of us. We don't even realize sometimes when we're going through our day the things that we are doing. We tend
right.
to recognize the things we forgot or we didn't have time to do or whatever. But we don't always recognize the things that we are doing. And
Yes.
it does take someone else to tell you sometimes. You just did all of this. Okay, yeah, maybe you didn't spend as many minutes as you wanted on it. You still did
Mhm.
it, and
Right.
you can always come back to it. There's nothing that says you can't, you know. And so I that's what I found works the best. And I worked for a company that was actually out of California, but it was a national company, and they created a computer science curriculum for pre-K to eighth grade.
Right.
And one thing that I think they did a phenomenal job at in their planning for what they were going to do to scale outside of California, they decided to only hire people who had been classroom teachers to be the instructional coaches that would go into those schools and help coach teachers, not just do the professional development and okay, email us if you need something, but we were at our schools every single week during the entire school year unless there was a reason that we couldn't be at that school that week. And then in the summer, we iterated curriculum. Those of us who had used and seen and watched and worked with teachers doing the curriculum, we got to then iterate the curriculum in the summer,
Mm.
which meant that even though it wasn't the end user, we got to go through lots of common issues with teachers across the country that did or did not work at one simple aspect, right?
Right.
We got the opportunity to iterate that and make it better for those teachers so they would want to do it again the next year.
Right.
But they got to build a relationship with us, and that's
Mhm.
a really big piece of the puzzle. They knew they had a person that was knowledgeable, that knew, at least had ideas to do something. You didn't have to know the answers for everything, but you were willing to problem solve with that teacher and help that teacher come up with a solution and develop that level of trust and help that teacher when you're visiting in other ways if they need. So I think that applying kind of that same idea with Maker is really the easiest way to have people see that a lot of things, a lot of parts and pieces of it, they're already doing. They just
Right.
may not even realize it, you know?
Yeah, the children's space. We won this social impact award from the Kravis Lab here in Southern California. It's from the Claremont colleges, and that came with a set of researchers. They stayed with us for a while, observed what we do, and then measured everything and stuff. But one key thing that they observed, which I never paid attention to, was that 46% of our students were girls. And
Oh yeah.
they highlighted this because they were like, compared to any of the STEM programs that run, that's a really incredibly high percentage. So that got me thinking, what is it then about maker education that is more attractive to people who never considered themselves as being a STEM professional or never considered a STEM career pathway even. But when it comes to makers, they definitely feel like they're included. So, given that sort of preamble, did you observe that it is more inclusive in that respect?
I think it has to do with the fact that in general, people in a makerspace are people who enjoy sharing their knowledge and that it just feels friendlier, like almost like there's a relationship is more important than the end of a project you're working on. Like, I want to help you because I care about you, not because it's my job kind of thing. And it
Right.
feels like any time that I've been to any maker spaces, I've had that same feeling. Whether I've just when I was traveling for work with that company, I lived in DC at the time, but I traveled to Arizona and California, um, Florida, other places. And so if I was staying there, sometimes I would stay for 2 weeks. And so I would request to stay over the weekend because I wanted to go and check out like maker spaces or if there was a maker fair, things like that, right? And so this is how I got to go to a lot of maker fairs. So it was a
Right.
great benefit. They
Yeah.
didn't realize it was a benefit. They were just like, "Oh, great, okay, great, sure, yeah, you can stay, whatever. We don't have to fly you home and fly you back, okay." But I was doing it for a little bit other reasons. But
Sure.
but everywhere that I went, no matter where it was in the country, every maker space I walked into, or every maker fair that I went to, whether it was a mini maker fair or a big giant maker fair,
Hmm.
people welcomed you there and you instantly felt like they meant it.
Right.
That will give a person confidence to do way more than if it takes 2 weeks to feel comfortable.
Mm.
And I know part of it's got to be my personality. However, I forced my sister to go with me in Orlando, and she had no idea what a maker fair was. She
Right.
became the biggest fan in 5 minutes. So I don't think it's just me.
Right. I mean, I'm nodding along because I completely agree, and it's great that you felt the same way. And I really appreciate you adding the anecdote of you bringing your sister along because here's the unbiased third person who also felt the same way. I took my wife along, and she's more like a numbers person, and she felt the same way too. I think that part of being a maker is incredible. So one of the mentors I have here is a guy called Rob, who started our local makerspace, and he's like, makers are just the nicest people. There's something about making that brings out the niceness in a person, which is
Yeah,
incredible. I don't think there's anything else out there that actually does that, right? There is something that
I
makes you want to help other people, makes you want to share. Uh, I mean, without trying to be controversial, it just feels like almost a religious experience.
yeah, I know everybody's always like, "Oh my gosh, I found my tribe. I
I
found where I belong."
Right. But the thing is, it's not, in a way, it's not like a religious experience because there's so many like things that you need in order for a religious experience to happen.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah,
people be the same, you need to speak the same language, dress the same way, and perform the same rituals. But here, there's like an incredible diversity, but still there's cohesion. I find that part very unique, like how there's such like completely extroverted, introverted, completely technical, completely art people, complete people like I don't want to touch a computer ever. Where at the same time there'll be guys who'll be like, I can build an AI program, and they all seem
yeah.
to have the same common thoughts. So, which is, um,
And I think it is. That desire to to share their work in an unselfish way for the sole purpose of sharing their passion. And if you want to know more, they're happy to go down and help you learn it. If you don't want to know more, they'll shift the conversation to what do you want to show me? Like it's awesome.
since you've taught for a while, and you've traveled, have you had a chance to compare the American maker movement with maybe an international? A lot of maker spaces in the US have shut down. And relatively
Mhm.
speaking, it's stronger in Europe. I recently chatted with an Italian makerspace founder, and
Mhm.
I've connected with others in like in Spain, in France, even England, and there is a community, and they understand this is like our local. Like in England, one guy said to me, "It's like my local pub. Like I go to a pub for a pint, I go to my makerspace."
And I think being the mindset of being open to it being that, because I think again, oftentimes here in America, we're going at 90 miles an hour. We often, I mean, look how big some of the areas that we live in are, like the area you're in.
Yeah,
Imagine if someone has 3 kids and they're going in 3 different directions after working all day to get them to the next thing. They're probably not going to even consider going to the pub. They'll just have a beer at home. So
right.
they just want to get home and be at home. And so I think that's part of like one of the differences. I know when I lived in DC, even though I was so busy all the time, I walked everywhere and I used public transportation and I was out doing so much stuff and I was not exhausted. When I
Mm,
would drive somewhere, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is the worst ever. Not just because the traffic's bad. It's like, I think I enjoyed not having to focus on that and I could like read a book I was, doing or finish drawing some idea that I had for something, so it was like I was still, I guess maybe I was multitasking and didn't realize it, but um, you have to really focus when we drive everywhere. You're really focused, and we get so used to doing it, we don't even realize how much mental energy that even takes.
yeah.
And then if you've got time crunch on top of that, like I just think it's because of our lifestyle in that sense that it's harder to
Okay.
have. A person would have to be super intentional, and that would be the thing that the family does together is how I think that it becomes successful here.
Mm.
Like it's hard to that's the only thing that I think of that's like that I can think of that makes it different.
That's a very good observation. I had not thought of that. You're right. I think it does make a lot of sense and why that affects how we behave. Because one of the other things I have seen is the maker spaces that do survive and have survived are almost hyper local. So they have
Hmm.
a fairly small dedicated member base, and they're very specific in how they use the makerspace. In the last few years, I've seen that libraries have started to become makerspaces.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you a little bit about sort of where do you see the future of maker education? I mean, so I know there's more people enabling it, and once it
Mhm.
gets in libraries, in my opinion, it's sort of you know widespread, at least acknowledged to be widespread. But
Yes.
but where do you see that going? Let me
Well,
know.
I think that I would love to see museums and libraries or science centers, museums and libraries kind of I don't know if collaborate's the right word, but like one thing in Arlington, Virginia that they did, they had these library pop-ups, and it was such a neat idea. So where Tech Shop was, it was in Crystal City, Virginia, which is Arlington, but along that whole street,
Yeah.
there's this set of shops that are underneath this office building. Like you can go into the storefront, but really you kind of go down, and these shops are down in the basement area. So when Tech Shop opened their uh, business in that area, basically right down the hallway, the library had one of their library pop-ups. So they would contract, I mean, not, they would negotiate, I think, to have like a empty space
Mhm.
with whoever owned it or whatnot for a certain amount of time to have these. Well, that particular library was all maker focused. So every day at lunch, all these people that were business people and people like myself that lived within walking distance or just went over to the library over at my lunchtime, they would have things like, I don't know, like decorating a pot to put a succulent in,
Right.
um, and have a little discussion about something.
Mm.
So it was a small pocket of time. It was only 45 minutes. It was free and it was convenient.
Right.
And so, like, I feel like that is a key, a way that like
Mm.
libraries and other places can somehow bridge that gap to give convenience and time where to kind of meet people where they are. And I
Gotcha.
loved that they themed it out to kind of go with tech shop in a way, like
Mm. Mm.
they did a lot of different maker things, but and they would just ask, they had an ongoing list, like tell us what you want us to do. And people would just leave up there what it was, and they would figure out a way to make these, I can't remember what they called them, but these 45-minute sessions happen, you know, each week. And so, and it was really great because as you know, what happens, people that enjoy doing that And we did this while we're just eating our lunches that we brought with us at the library, and then it just ends up you've met some new people in your area that you didn't even know were there, and then
Mhm.
you have, somebody else to do something with, you know. So
Yeah.
I feel like that's a great way for it to happen. But for teachers, I would love, and I read on Facebook, uh, in a Facebook group, somebody else had brought this up too, and I was like, oh my gosh, I was thinking that same thing. But they're wanting to start a makerspace that's focused more on teachers having the time and space to make whatever, whether it's for their classroom or they want to learn more. Because
Right. Right.
again, when they're told they have to do computer science, coding, whatever, they're getting a crash course and their kids pass them up quick, which isn't a problem. It's just there's a lot of teachers that actually want to understand it.
Right.
And it's sometimes when, again, you get home, you're a parent, you have kids, like you're not going to do it at 11 o'clock at night. You're going to go to
Mhm.
bed instead. So having a space where teachers get that hands-on time to give them that confidence, to give them a creative outlet, to have them, you know, feel like they're having that space to also catch up because it feels like kids are go as fast as everything else is. Like their little brains are soaking up everything no matter what grade they're in.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
there's like no so much. And it feels like sometimes you want to be relatable to your students. So you want to also learn, but that sometimes seems a little bit overwhelming if you're trying to
Mhm.
tackle it on your own. But
Right.
if you had a group of educators and some people who can help answer some questions and guide you, oftentimes the educators are going to figure it out by talking to themselves, talking among each other where they feel comfortable. And then that conversation will grow to the other people that are there and so on and so forth. I
Yeah.
think
No,
that that would be really,
that's a really great insight. When we ran the children's makerspace, um, I told you that the numbers we did were quite high. I think it was just under 10,000 kids that we'd worked with. And we only started in 2018. And this number was by 2020. But 70% of that volume did not come from our classes at the physical makerspace. They came because we'd set up a van and a trailer. And so we were going to events.
yep,
So I'm kind of focused on that one earlier, the word that you used, convenience, because I didn't realize that is what would enable us to grow so rapidly, because we were doing it mostly because we ran out of space, and geographically
yes,
California is huge. So we
yes.
were sometimes going 60, 80 miles to a different location. But taking it to them really, really changed,
Yeah.
I'd say, the game. Yeah.
And
So,
California is also really, I mean, as a landscape diverse, you also have spaces that are not like LA and packed with people.
mm,
And a lot of those uh, kids or families may not have the opportunity unless you're going to them or closer to them. And that's where I think like even a library in a rural area may not have the capabilities that a library in an urban area would have. And
yes.
maybe there's ways to kind of meet because like our library has a van, has a maker van.
Mhm.
And theirs is they have different items that they put in the van to bring to a
Right.
location, take it out and do stuff. I've seen some maker vans and trailers that are almost like a food truck, like they open it up and there's like that's so
Yeah.
cool, you
Yeah.
know, and do the things and fold it back up and go. But so I know that they go out, like you're saying, they go to a lot of different places and they partner with a lot of after school organizations. We partner with them. I've gone and done a lot of training of new staff that they had. It was actually right after the pandemic when they were getting to go back into um, like go back out and do outreach and stuff again. And they had a lot of new employees that had been working, like not working at the library, or they were doing some orientation virtually and stuff, but they weren't like working with humans. And they
Mm.
did not, they had not, they were new to like, not that some of the items that were being used were difficult, like Sparrows are not difficult, or some of these, like they're very intuitive on an iPad for a
Mm.
kid to be able to do something. They
Yeah.
wanted it to be meaningful. And the librarian that was over all of that was having to do so many things. They reached out and asked if I could come help them train the new people so that they are adding some rigor and depth and it's not just a free for all playtime. And
Yeah.
so we worked together and helped develop basically kind of a pathway that these new people could sort of step in and do that same thing because they were going to all of these different places. They kind of, you didn't have to have something new every time because you're not seeing the same people, but to give them a comfort level that they could branch out and do other things as they kept doing it. And so I just think really like working together. People need
Mm.
to work together. Communities have so many resources that no one knows about. Like the people who need the resources are always surprised. Like, what? We have that? Where?
Yeah.
And it's been there 25 years or something. So just and Dr. Kleiner probably mentioned this too, like the STEM learning ecosystems. Like really an ecosystem is, I think, the way to go because
Mm.
um, I know I can reach out to I can reach out to someone in our ecosystem that's not near me where I live
Mhm.
and shoot them a text and ask a question and they answer because we've been on calls together or whatever. We have a similar issue going on. Hey,
Right.
how did you end up solving that? Here's what I did. I didn't like the way it went. I want to change something. How did yours go? You know,
Mm.
it's takes 5 minutes, but you're reaching somebody who's seeing an entirely different point of view because they're not right here with you,
Mm.
in your same area saying, yeah, it sucked for me too. you know, it's kind of rejuvenating whenever you can know that, gosh, it's not just us. There's problems
Yes.
everywhere. And look, there's
Yeah.
solutions everywhere too, like, and get to be able
Like,
to learn
I
from other people.
definitely has an inbuilt problem for people who are funding these things sometimes. Like one example, when we were running the makerspace and people saw that a pedagogical model work, we got hired by a city who'd spent like $2.5 million building this brand spanking new space. And they were like, "What machines should we get?" And I kind of told them like, not the top end ones. Don't get like the best 3D printer. Don't get the biggest like $10,000 laser. Get stuff that people would use and be user friendly, and that people feel comfortable. And if something broke, you wouldn't be too worried. That sort of thing. But they didn't listen to me. They got all the more expensive things, and it kind of got to a point where they were like, "Oh, we built this great space, and we have this fantastic equipment. Why aren't people using it?" And even if they're using it, they just come in, they'll make a small doodah, and then they're gone. And I said,
Yep.
because really, that's not why people are going to make, right? They're going to make
Mhm.
one when they want to make. Second, if they feel comfortable. And comfort cannot be just um, allocated, because you build a building, you bought all the equipment, and so it's an inherent problem in a way. It's almost like the methodology or the pedagogical model that sort of makes maker spaces work is difficult to quantify for people
Yes.
who are funding it, because you can fund a building, you can fund the machines, you can fund personnel, but how do you fund the specific cultural
The closest experience I've had to it pedagogically is, do you know 4-H? Do you know the organization 4-H?
no, I don't think I'm familiar with it.
Okay, so 4-H has been around for over 100 years. It's a positive youth development. And most often, in the U.S., in every single state, one of our universities, one of the state universities, will be a land grant university.
Hmm.
That land grant university has a department called extension. So you may have heard of your university's extension office before. Okay,
Right.
so their whole purpose is to take research and get it out to the public. So they do that by way of they'll have master gardeners. Their job is to help people learn about the plants and be better stewards of what the property they have, or if they just want to do potted plants, whatever it is, learning about plants. They always have a water division that does all kinds of water ecology stuff. They'll have every state's county has their own extension office. And so that extension office may have slightly different priorities than a different one. So like in California, I'm quite certain there's a lot of uh, stuff that's fisheries and water related for the fact that runoff goes into the ocean and things like
Mhm.
that, right? So a lot of extension offices have people that you could call and ask about. I called my extension office here and asked about some mushrooms that were growing in my yard that I could not get rid of. The guy told me 5 things over the phone. Like
Wow.
they do it for free everywhere.
Right.
And so one of the things that they also have everywhere is 4-H. And the H's are hands, heart, health. I remember the other one.
I'll look it
Can't
up.
remember. But hands is hands, working with your hands. Okay. And so it's youth development. It's most associated with agriculture, so animals. It's project based work that kids do outside of school. And, but there is every single subject matter you can imagine. So there's all these projects. Well, 4-H, I grew up in 4-H, so I knew what 4-H was, and my parents did too. It's very common in rural areas, and where we live in Louisiana, where it is the third largest city in Louisiana that we live in. However, in between the 4 hours in between the next largest city is a lot of farmland. So almost all of us
Right.
have either been on a farm, lived on a farm, know somebody on a farm, all of that. So um, I did in 4-H growing up. I did photography, which is how it sparked my interest in photography so much. And I've stayed an avid photographer since about third grade. And now I'm closer to 60 than I am 50. So that's a long time. It sparked an interest
Yeah.
that I have always on the side done photography for people if they wanted it. But really, it was just my personal interest and
Hmm.
wanting to be good at it and
Right.
wanting I play around with doing different types of photography, that kind of stuff. Uh, I did sewing. I did cooking. Like some of these things are basic life skills, things that are great for someone to know, right? However, when you're doing 4-H, it's a project. So there's a book and you can go through and they help you. You have club meetings. The clubs are usually focused on certain aspects, like it might be a club that does electronics. So maybe they do robotics, maybe they do soldering, like different things like that. Or maybe it's an animal club. But the whole purpose is to reflect, apply. So you're doing the project, you're doing the work, you actually have a conversation and debrief and what did you learn? How did it go? If you could do it different, what would you do again? Oh, okay. So go ahead and do that.
Right.
And you get time to keep it. It's built into every single thing that 4-H does.
Right.
So fast forward, I ended up working for Washington State University when we lived there,
Hmm.
extension, and I worked for 4-H. And my job was it was one of those 21st century learning grants, and they decided they wanted to have a tech lab. We called it a tech lab. It was really a lot of hands-on learning lab, but anyway, we had some technology. But it was a tech lab in a community center in East Tacoma, which is very diverse in cultures, not nearly diverse in the income that comes in. It's kind of down.
Mm.
That community, people would use this community center.
Right.
And so my job was to turn this idea into something. So I had to get these kids to come in and do things after school and do camps. And it was when you build a community intentionally, they come. And so I did camps. Let me see, I did camps. I started like in April, I think, and I started camps in May or June whenever school got out. And that very first year, and I did like, whatever, 8 weeks of camp or whatever it was. But our camps could only go Monday through Thursday
Mm.
because the community center was closed on Friday. And
Oh,
so I was like, I'll do a morning session and an afternoon session. And, at lunchtime, I won't be babysitting kids, like whatever parents know that, like, if you give your kid permission to be at the community center, I'm not watching them, whatever, like I get an hour for lunch. So the kids would go outside and play and do stuff. Another thing kids don't do is play. But anyway, these kids, because following things about the model of 4-H and experiential education, and me being intentional to develop that community. And if you've ever done, any reading about team building and communities, it's that whole you're like everybody's a little bit like, I don't know. Then all of a sudden they get to know each other and it's like, oh my gosh, we're flying, we're doing awesome. Wait, we're gonna have to leave soon. Oh, okay. Every single week. But it was eye opening because I had to just trust the process. I was like, 4 days. Okay, I'm just gonna roll with it and do what I gotta do, right? And so that first week, 15 kids who never met each other before, by Thursday afternoon were in tears like they had been together for 50 years. Like they were like, I don't want to leave though. And so every week we had a showcase in the afternoon for the parents to see what the kids had done. And we did all kinds of things. And I mean, we did rocketry, we did kite making, and I really was fortunate because I got to kind of within the scope of whatever I had planned, I could adjust to go with what the kids wanted. So we would have discussions about what's going well, what's not going well every day
right.
for me too. So I could adjust, and I would tell them from the very beginning, like, you're getting to help create what we're doing. So this is for you guys. You have to let me know what's going well and what's not
Yeah.
going well. And, but we also have to think about what we can do differently because we can't just say it's not going well and do nothing.
Right. Right.
And then one of the big pieces at the end of the week was, so all throughout the week, we would focus on like communication, collaboration, um, like teamwork. We'd have like three things that we would do out of a big giant list. And so throughout the week, just periodically, if you saw somebody having great communication, let me know.
Mm.
Kids, when they got to share and have their voice, even the shyest kid in the class would speak up and say something because and it became a safe place. Like it was okay to say if you didn't like something.
Right.
It was okay, like not that I became some therapist or anything. It was just a safe place. Like they learned appropriate ways
Mm.
to have discussions that are tough and celebrate with discussions that are easy.
Right.
And it was just, and a huge part of it, I know, was because I was intentional about building a community first
Mm.
and doing the things. Yes, we did all of the things that were on the piece of paper that said that we did, but we're talking about kids and kids who probably don't have all their needs met. And if you don't have your basic needs met, it's real hard to feel safe. So making sure that they had that safe space, number one.
Right.
And so it turned out to be wonderful. And when the grant ended, after 3 years, the grant ended, and high schoolers they had started like I guess they were in ninth and 10th grade. But one of the boys that he always came and he always volunteered to help at the summer camp and stuff, but like you could tell he liked that was a space he liked being in. So he
Mm.
did the things he needed to do to be in the space. Now
Right.
he also enjoyed like he would enjoy making a little movies or whatever, but really it was more he wanted to be in that space.
Gotcha.
That kid, I mean, when I was the last thing I carried to my truck to bring it back to our main office, that kid was there with me the entire time. And since then, I mean, that was, gosh, I don't know, 2009, I think, or something. At least once a year, that kid reaches out to me and
Wow.
asks how I'm doing. Like, to me, the fact that we were able to put community first
Hmm.
and kids get to do the things they're passionate about made the bigger impact than the fact that they did a STEM project.
Right. And I mean, both in your story about photography and this
Yeah,
child's behavior and how the stickiness to it, right? It's
yeah,
amazing. 4-H definitely sounds like they have codified this sort of
oh yeah,
feeling and emotional bond behavior to
yes.
and finessed it where it can really appeal to individuals and their
And
family.
what's interesting is that they're taking actual child development research and applying it. And every one of the agents, or is what they're called, an agent that's over 4-H in that area. They're tenured professors. They're doing this is their
This
research.
is their
Like that
research.
lab I was running, my boss was doing research on what I
Right.
was reporting back to him on what was happening because his big idea, him and another one of the educators, their idea was we need to build community in classrooms
Mm.
because I'm not sure if you're familiar with experiential education in the sense not just having an experience, but have you heard of the programs like Outward Bound,
I
these wilderness programs? The pedagogy behind that is basically kind of like what 4-H does. They're both based on the same ideas, really. And it's that do, reflect, apply, or the what, so what, like why does that matter, and then the now what are we going to do
no.
with it?
Right.
So they're based on those things. And their idea, which I think was an awesome idea, but their idea was building these communities like I did in those 4 days, 2.5 hours in the morning, 2.5 hours in the afternoon, and was intentional and built these communities with these kids. If teachers did that in their classroom, no matter what they're teaching, it would be even better.
Mm.
And so part of my job was to go work with teachers and model that and show them that kids can do a lot of things. You have to build trust, not only that they trust you, but you have to trust them. Like,
Right.
I mean, you have to trust they're not going to bash each other's head in if they have a hammer in their hand. It's probably not going to happen. I mean, but if you show them how to use the hammer, they might use it appropriately. Otherwise, yes, they're going to bang something. It's a hammer. I
Yeah.
mean, they're going to break something if you don't give them a nail to hammer. It's
Yeah.
kind of, you feel like you need to hammer when you have a hammer in your hand, you know. And so, like trusting that kids can do things,
Yeah.
you know. And so, I think I mean, until talking to you, I really didn't realize like maybe 4-H did impact me in ways I didn't even realize because, like I
Yeah.
said from the beginning, I was naturally doing a lot of these things
Right.
as a brand new first year teacher with all ages,
Because that was
and it's just
embedded in your learning journey, and you know
yeah,
that worked, and you already saw how it worked for a diverse group. So when you were put in that position, you're obviously gonna
yeah,
rely on things that you already know work, and 4-H
right,
was the one that brought it to you. So
yeah.
that's well, thank you very much for sharing that detailed journey. I think this was a fantastic insight. The philosophical side of the maker movement and how to bring it into the more sort of structural side. I think your stories, your anecdotes, and your insight were fantastic. Hopefully, our listeners will get a lot more out of this as well because of that. Thank you so much for being on the Be a Maker podcast. I appreciate it. I appreciate you sharing all of this with.
Well, and you're of course welcome to come to the Maker Fair that we're going to have in we're having it, let me see, make sure I get my date right here. March 29th and 30th. And what's going to be super cool about this Maker Fair is that we're partnering with the Air Force Base has
Mhm.
their annual air show. And
Okay.
last time we tried to fill the one of the B-52 hangars, the big giant big airplane, full of STEM. And we did about halfway. Our goal this year
Okay.
is we're filling that whole thing. And we're
Nice.
combining it with Maker Faire. So we've worked with the Air Force Base and we're combining it with Maker Faire. We are also a couple of weeks after that going to be having a second part of our Maker Faire here at the Science Center so that we can have some of those types of makers that would not be able to be at a high security it's on a government installation. So, but I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
I'm looking forward to that.
That would be so awesome. That would be perfect. So,
All right, great.
and
Thank
we
you.
didn't get to talk about robotics. Interestingly, really quick, um,
Uh-huh.
my middle school robotics team,
Uh-huh.
um, girls are the ones that stay. Isn't that crazy? I thought it was just going to end up being a bunch of boys because we started out with boys. And though there's one girl that has been, this is her third year, and so she's been on the team the whole time as other people have kind of cycled through, and she keeps saying, I want an all girls team. And I was like, we're a community team. We can't say someone can't be on our team, but you recruit whoever you recruit, you know? And so she would spread the word to everybody. And right now we have I think five girls and one boy. And
But that
I just think it's so interesting that the middle school girls
is
are loving it. So it's great though. It's fun.
so okay. So one of the things that I started to delve into, because I'm an former academic as well. After we got those numbers back,
Hmm.
is there's research from, let's say, like 2008, 2009, that shows that what happens in middle school, specifically with girls, and I saw it happen to my daughter too, is there's just this social programming, just
Oh
it
yeah.
feels so weird because I was aware of it and I was trying very hard to combat it, but it still happened. Is they get this like, oh, you don't want to be an engineer. Like that's not what that's boys do.
Hmm.
And it's been documented. But then if you start asking them questions like, well, would you want to, address this environmental problem? Or would you want to, like one girl, from the study I'm quoting, this girl was saying, I want to, when I grow up, I want to do something about the quality of air because my mom has a lung problem. Now,
Oh,
now, it sounds like a very, oh, I'm just caring for my mom. But what actually, in order for her to go towards that solution, now, even if she doesn't solve it, she actually has to embark on a STEM career, right? But the thing is, calling it a STEM career, saying that she's going to do engineering, just labeling it like that is what's going to put her off it because of what engineering is. And that exact same thing, I feel like, happened to my daughter. She's come around a full circle where she's like, oh, I'm going to do this thing about recycle. And I told her, like, along, because obviously she knows how to make. And I told her,
yeah.
you can get into materials. And that time she was like, yeah, but that's all manufacturing. That's engineering. That's like, all this. And now, like, the fact that she's come back to it, but she's come back from a very different mindset. And I think it's just so interesting.
So, and you saying that, I'm thinking back and I'm like, yeah, like I have said before, I didn't know how interesting and fun math was. And I've always said, like, I mean, maybe if they would have made it more hands-on, I would have liked it more. Or, maybe the teacher wasn't interesting or whatever. I think part of it was, like you're saying, that thing that happens where, because I distinctly remember it being eighth grade, like me thinking I
Yeah.
could no longer do math and I didn't think it was
It,
interesting. Now,
it is just, yeah, it is just that, and it specifically happens with girls. It probably happens to boys too. It's not that it doesn't happen, but I'm saying it's just more obvious that switch because there's like the stage where they both think like the same way, and then
yeah,
suddenly it changes, you know,
yeah,
which
that's interesting.
Um, thank you very much again for being on the Be a Maker podcast and sharing all your insights about the maker movement, maker education, and how things are going to be shaping up for the US in the near future.
Well, you're quite welcome. Thank you for having me, and it's been a wonderful conversation.